Hello, YouTube, and welcome to the second attempt of our first airing of our discussion for the Guild of Inquiry. We had some technical difficulties that have been ironed out now, and I think I'm very excited to start this podcast. You guys want to introduce yourselves again?
Sure. My name is Duncan. I'm an Australian. I do a bit of writing. I love discussion and dialogue, and that's why I'm here, I think. I'm very grateful to be here, and without the help of Christopher and Wes, I wouldn't be here at all.
Yeah, thank you.
You're too modest.
Too modest. I'm from Missouri, in Iowa, a little bit. Most viewers will know me, but for today. But I've been working on writing books with you, Duncan, as you know, and starting this podcast up. Thank you. Shout out to Chris Mallard for putting me on his show, and Duncan. And
yes, thank you, Chris.
We look forward to the inquiry that we plan on this podcast.
Yes.
So I think I intend this channel to be a center, sort of like a symposium for inquiry. We're not a beacon of people with answers, but rather a collection of individuals interested in endeavoring into philosophical inquiry. We're here to motivate questions rather than pretend that we can fundamentally answer them, which isn't to say we're going to avoid substantive answers. It's just that if and when they're given, we'd like those answers to be punctuated with concessions to implications, whether they be, ramifications of epistemic uncertainty or, things resultant from inherent constraints of discrete systems of logic.
Yeah, because none of us here pretend to know all the answers to all the questions. It's an impossible thing to do, but we do aspire to ask good questions and try and get good answers from them, but it generally leads to more questions anyways. So it's a endless endeavor.
Yes. So I don't think I introduced myself. I'm just an undergraduate student majoring at mathematics, pure mathematics at UNC. I do some specialization in formal logic, and I dabble in a little bit of physics. So in this video, our first topic will be discussing Freelee, the banana girl, and the philosophical implications of her lifestyle and diet. I want to make clear that this channel is meant to be an extrapolation of potential profundity from places where people may not think to look for such profundity. So in other words, we'd like to have a charitable interpretation of people's ideas. And
yes,
furthermore, we would like to motivate questions that people may not even think need asking. So we chose Freelee because it's a topic that's potentially contentious. And by topic, I should say a collection of topics, because there's the lifestyle, there's the diet, there are the ethical implications of both, the environmental implications, etc. So these things culminated together in kind of a set of parameters that I think warrant consideration. Hey there.
Hey.
I assume it's one of your guys' friends.
Astria. I'm not sure which one that is. I think it's one of my friends. I'm not sure.
I see. But in any case,
thank you, Astria.
So in any case, before we dive in, I just want to preface that I'm not so interested. Rebecca, gotcha. Thanks, Rebecca.
Oh, hey, Rebecca.
I want to preface that we're not so much interested, Freelee, if you're watching this, we're not so much interested in tearing apart your argument as much as extrapolating from it, if and when possible, even if not well articulated, points that may have a kernel of wisdom. So I'm here to bring rigor if and when possible, but also to extrapolate and concretize people's intuitions. So having said that, before diving in, speaking for myself, I don't know if you guys feel the same. I'd be far more comfortable talking with you. Come on the show. We'd love to talk and have a dialogue. Yeah. You can better defend your position than taking a video and ripping into it and maybe missing or even not even trying to rip into it, but just perhaps missing points that you could have better articulated or better concretized yourself. Are you guys in agreement there?
In agreement.
Yeah. I mean, I've been doing a bit of research on her and things like that, but she has a very large video library and I haven't been able to watch them all. There may have been points that we address or that she addresses in other videos that we didn't get to see. And I would love to have her on. And this is no way an attack video on her or anything like that. No personal attacks here or anything like that. It's just we examining And it would be great to have her on so that she could better explain and help us examine this whole thing.
I think I agree.
Yep.
All right, gentlemen. Well, without further ado, let's begin a video that I found that is, I think, sufficiently recent that it can be demonstrative of what I think Freelee can be said to be somewhat all about. I think we'll try to let the video speak for itself if possible. So let's just do a screen share of this. And here we go.
TikToks. So a little bit of a backstory here. I came to veganism in 2007 via weight loss and via health. But pretty soon after, I educated myself on the ethics of the lifestyle. And I discovered that veganism is all about animals. It's all about animal liberation. And it's not just some cuisine that you can come and go from. So I started.
Okay, so I think that pretty much shows that two major points of interest insofar as Freelee is concerned are the potential health benefits,
yep,
ethical ramifications.
Yep,
indeed.
I think,
go ahead.
Sorry. I think it's important to make a distinction that I feel that she doesn't, is that there is like vegans who are vegans for dietary reasons, and there are vegans who are vegans for ethical reasons. And even though she actually started herself for dietary reasons, she says, she is now strong on the ethical reasons for her choice, and she seems to naysay on anyone who's just a vegan just purely by diet.
I'm not sure. I mean, I would like to confirm that with her, because there are videos I've seen where she seems militant, but there's also a distinction between her method of delivery and her actual position philosophically.
Yeah. This is true. Yes,
right, so
I agree.
Sure. And I'd rather confirm that from her than assume.
I would love to have her on and actually be able to discuss this with her. And the invitation is open, and we're happy to have you on another cast if you're out there Freelee listening to this. We're happy to have you on as a guest, and you can explain things that we may be missing.
Yeah, that's great. So I think since we've touched on, broached on these two topics, the first we could actually bring up would probably be the diet, specifically the dietary implications of the vegan lifestyle. And I think I have a few clips that can actually already be demonstrative of the complexity of these things, particularly insofar as like the potential for conflation of variables is concerned. So what I think I'll do is we'll play these clips for context, and then we'll dive in from there. Is that fine?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So let's go ahead and I'm going to just go to. All right, here we go. This is the first one by Dr. Rhonda Patrick. She specializes in diet and nutrition.
Yep.
Recent study that was published, that was the largest study, observational study done so far, looking at protein intake and all-cause mortality and cancer mortality. And it found, like a lot of other studies, that higher protein consumption, protein consumption from meat was associated with a higher all-cause mortality and a higher cancer mortality. But then when the data was sub-analyzed and other unhealthy style factors were looked at, so if someone had one other unhealthy lifestyle factor, being either obesity, smoking, excessive alcohol consumption, or being sedentary, then they had higher all-cause mortality and a higher cancer mortality if they ate meat. But guess what? If they had none of those other unhealthy lifestyle factors, they had the same all-cause mortality and cancer-related mortality that the non-meat eaters had.
So this was very interesting.
Yeah.
And it turns out this is not the first of these clips. Let's bring up Dr. Michael Greger. He's also a doctor of medicine. So let's just let the clip speak for itself really quick. Not that, I don't know, can a clip speak for itself? Probably not true. Okay.
Yeah, it can speak for itself, but it can't debate.
Or play at the right time. There we go.
A study of 8,000 vegetarians followed for 18 years. They reported no difference between the mortality rates of meat eaters compared to the mortality rates of vegetarians. That doesn't make any sense. What are the top three killers in the U.S.? Heart disease, cancer, stroke. How could we be dying at the same rate as meat eaters. Not only did vegetarians not seem to live longer, they had basically the same number of colon cancer deaths, the same fatal stroke rates, and the same rates of fatal heart disease. They found no difference in the risk of dying from a heart attack between those that ate meat and those that didn't eat meat. I say, doesn't that go against everything we know, though? They found that vegetarians had over twice the risk of dying from degenerative brain diseases like Alzheimer's disease. Now, right now, all the smug vegans in the room are thinking, I know what's going on, right? Isn't milk just liquid meat? And aren't eggs like little cholesterol bombs? No wonder they're not doing so hot, right? They're dragging down the average, right? Separate out the vegans, and then you'll see a little longevity, baby, you know? Well, unfortunately, neither of these two studies separate out the vegans. What is it about vegetarian and vegan diets that's increasing our risk of dying so much that it's counteracting kind of all of our natural benefits? What is it? And just as importantly, can we change it? Yes, we think we know exactly what's going on, and yes, with but a few simple changes.
Okay, so answer to the question. Let's just skip right here. I found it. You guys can watch the whole video if you want to hear the rest, but the short answer, or the summative answer, is as follows.
I did find it to be a very educational video, this one.
Yes.
Mass per day. And so the ideal ratio, intake ratio, should ideally be less than 4-to-1. 4 omega-6s for every 1 omega-3. So if you look at the latest studies, ratio for meat eaters was about 7-to-1. Vegetarians, though, 10-to-1. And the ratio for vegans was 15-to-1. So vegetarians...
So the point raised here is that there was a relationship between the consumption of particular omega-3s and the ratio for vegans and vegetarians is speculated to be such that it offsets the benefits. You can watch the whole video for the specifics, but the point is there are a repository of confounding variables that I have found in these studies, even things like the China study. They don't really control very well for many of these potentially confounding variables. And because of that, it makes it very difficult to concretize and to say precisely which way dietary is speaking this leans. And so I think this, go ahead, Duncan.
Yeah, no, Rhonda was saying exactly that. She was saying that a lot of the studies that they had done on veganism and meat eating, they didn't take into account other factors like, does the person smoke, does the person drink? And the vegans tend to have less people in their group who smoke and drink, and that skews the results a little bit. It's not just their diet with their food, but also their diet with their smoking and drinking sort of things like that, that helps their longevity.
Yeah, that's right. And hey there, is it Junius? Is that right?
Yes.
Hello, Junius.
Shout out. Thank you.
So I think that another potential problem with these studies, beyond this, the issue of potential for confounding variables, is the concern that when you do the mathematics, there are a lot of things that can go wrong, in that it's not as easy as looking at a graph as just inferring from the shape of the graph the implications. You can have a graph that's asymptotically tended downwards, but that doesn't necessarily imply, for example, I remember there was it was a claim, I think, if I'm not mistaken, by a contemporary philosopher that we're getting less violent with time. And the claim was that because if you look at certain statistics pertaining to, violent mortality rates, they're asymptotically going down. But of course, a mathematician would look at the systems of differential equations and understand that all that has to happen is that it takes more time for people to instantiate that violence than for additional people to be born. That is to say, all that has to happen is that the birth rate can exceed the rate at which people grow up to instantiate that physical violence, and you would still expect that quotient to asymptotically approach zero. So it
and also, another, like, this is what we're talking about with so many different variables and things like that. You're saying people are dying less from violence or whatever, or he was, sorry. Medicine has come a long way. Now things that would have killed you 10, 20 years ago have a chance of not killing you as well. So that's going to skew the results as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So there, I would say that the best thing we can do on this topic is to make the concession that it would be far more productive to bring on people that are more educated on the topic, because I don't specialize in medicine, anatomy, neuroanatomy, biochemistry, molecular biology. I have a naive understanding of these topics, perhaps, but I'm not, I don't think I'm qualified to really make deep arguments. I can analyze the logic and the mathematics, but as far as the subject matter, I think I'm limited in that respect. So I would say to Dr. Michael Greger, to Dr. Rhonda Patrick, I don't think it's ever likely, but if you guys want to come on and we can have you guys talk about this, I think it'd be informative. We could, hear you for points of clarification, and also the audience, anyone watching now or at a future date, if you can find a good article, a really thorough article with substantiated study, so even better, a good study, please let us know in the description, comment or contact us on our website. We'll look over the study and we'll see if it really stands to a sufficient degree of rigor that, say, to an extent that we could stand on it with some degree of confidence. Because when I poured through so many kinds of texts, I couldn't really find anything substantive that didn't have such a preponderance of potentially confounding variables.
Yeah, it's so hard because there is so many different variables in these things. Like with everything, there's so many different variables. That's why doing studies on these kinds of things can be so hard and time consuming, and they can get conflicting reports, conflicting studies too because of that.
Another person I think would be worth mentioning to bring on would be That Unnatural Vegan. There's no that there. It's just, I kind of refer to her as a thing. Her name is Unnatural Vegan on YouTube, and she also seems to be interested in discourse insofar as the ethics and health related to veganism. So, Also, Dr. Stephanie Buttermore, I think, is worth mentioning. She's popular on YouTube, and she's also pretty well learnt in anatomy, physiology, and some of the chemistry, although she specialized, I think, in cancer, if I'm not mistaken, cancer research. But I think she's sufficiently well learnt on the subject to add to a dialogue in a meaningful way. So I think that having it made those concessions, we can move on to the ethical parameters and open up for future discussions and future videos the implications pertaining to health. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, totally.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So then, having it established that, I think we can move into a discussion of the ethics of veganism. And so now, of course, I've got a few videos to play that kind of give us something around which to begin.
Sorry.
So anyway, let's begin with the videos, shall we?
Indeed.
All right, so let's begin with the first one. And I'm going to okay, so let's first begin with Freelee's ideas.
I'm still vegan. I'm still vegan because I don't want to live in a world where it's normal to use and abuse other animals. It's like being part of a global society that thinks it's okay to rape, torture, shoot, skin, stab, slice, dice, and eat billions of animals every year for no good fucking reason. Those are not my ethics. That is not my community. I mean, I don't want to be part of a society that values six-packs and thigh gaps over the life of an animal, where skin texture is more important than whether your food had a face or not. I don't want to be a member of a civilization so fucking sick that every year over 10 million humans eat themselves into an early grave. I don't want to meet the same fate, if you know what I'm saying. I'm still vegan because I don't want to see dead animals on plates. I don't have to dodge their body parts as I'm reaching for my tofu in the supermarket. I don't want to smell their burning flesh as I'm walking down the street. I'm sick of having to avoid other humans as they celebrate over an animal's dead body. Basically, I don't want to be surrounded by torture, disease, death, everywhere I fucking go. So I make sure I don't support that system through my actions and my purchase. I'm still vegan because although most humans have been trained to be selfish assholes, like I was before, I still have a fuck left in the human race. I still believe this species can turn shit around and actually start giving a fuck about animals. That's why I cannot support a practice that kills more humans than all the wars, murders, and traffic accidents combined. I'm still vegan because animals exist on this earth with me, not for me, not for my use. Their bodies do not belong to me. Their fate is not up to me. So I leave them the fuck alone. Simple. Because cows are not milk machines. Chickens are not egg machines. Calves are not handbags. Fish are not oil supplements. Your pigs are not bacon. And a fox is not a fucking fashion item. They are living, breathing earthlings that I share this planet with, that I respect. So I leave them the fuck alone.
Okay. She's very passionate, isn't she?
I admire her passion for it, that's for sure. And as an Australian, her vernacular doesn't worry me either.
It's fine. All right.
So what are the implications of what she's doing, though, is something I'm concerned about as far as upon her viewers. Is she getting a good message across?
I think that's a good question, Wes. That's a good question.
However,
I also think we'll concede that the problem with how she's saying things is she's not making directly, like in syllogistic form, propositional claims in a more concise way that one might when debating, right? She is. Yeah. What I mean is it's in the background, meaning there are assumptions in the background of what she's stating.
And to be fair to her, that may be the style of video that she was going for. It did very much feel like an activism video. But us three here always, love stats and things like that. So more of them we will love, but I can understand where she is coming from, at least.
She also seemed to be assuming that there's a lot of animal abuse, which in her premises there, and there is a lot of abuse that happens, but that's not the normal thing.
It gets highlighted. All negative.
I don't know.
So I think it's a good point to bring that up, animal abuse. It does show. It's a true fact that there's abuse by different people. It's also a fact, though, that that's illegal and should be stopped and enforced.
Well,
so
we have to be careful. We have to be careful here because
I'm saying some shoulds and things.
It seems like she has a superiority complex, like her ethics, objectivity. Everyone else disagrees with her. I'm not sure about that. I think that's what one could infer from looking at the message. However, it's also possible that behavior is oriented towards some goal. So, for example, we are not being as precise and technical as I would prefer, precisely because we are trying to appeal to an audience with a degree of rigor, right? And so sometimes a person will act in a certain way in contrast to the philosophical positions they have. There may be a possible operative contradiction even in that claim.
Well, I'd like to bring it back to something that I said. I'd like to bring it back to something I said earlier, which is we were talking about how when she originally, she says that she started for dietary reasons and then the ethical reasons followed. But it does seem to be that the ethical reasons are foremost in her mind now. So that seems to be the driving force behind. And I'm not saying good or bad either way. I'm just saying that just seems to be where a shift that's happened. Also, another thing that I'd like to mention is that on her channel, she calls herself a frugivore, which is an animal that eats only fruit. And after doing a little bit of looking into that, that includes nuts and things like that. There is a diet that can be had with that can be, beneficial for humans and workable. But you've got to be very meticulous about what you eat and what you to get some of the nutrients from other places, because in a omnivorous diet you can actually get it from a variety of different sources and you won't even notice, whereas when you're on a frugivore diet you got to really make sure, or a vegan diet, you got to really make sure that you get it from the places where you can.
It's possible. I would be careful, though. I would be careful to make any kind of dietary claims simply because of, as previously conceded, the preponderance of potentially conflating variables.
Because also we don't know for a fact that one way is healthier than the other yet. It's still something that they're trying to iron out. So that's definitely.
I also don't want to misinform people watching to say that we have no clue. That's not what I'm saying either. I'm just saying I would rather discuss this with people who have the necessary or sufficient credentials, and not even that credentials, the people who have a sufficient understanding of the subject matter that could help us feel out the topology of the situation.
Yeah, understandable. I mean, like I did I'm a certified personal trainer, but it was a while back that I did that. I have a very rudimentary understanding of nutrition and things like that, but that's what I mean. So I did a little bit of research into this whole thing because I was kind of unsure. And the thing is, like, you're saying about we can't be sure about the whole thing, partly because that's our philosophy, but also partly because like science and medicine still isn't sure about how it all works. That doctor that you looked before, he was showing he was showing that we're just making, like, he was saying, why are the vegetarians and vegans not living longer? And it's like, oh, we've just found out this new information. We think it's this now. You know what I mean? And so
it's that, but it's also even in the systems of differential equations that describe these like biomechanical processes, we can't even have exact, but only numerical approximations.
Yes, and also another thing to add to that as well is that humans are the same, but we're also very different from each other. So some people will respond better to some diets than others. Just part of our makeup, our genetics.
Yes. So I think there are other clips that can kind of, because these are general claims, but I think we can concretize and perhaps specify. We can't discuss veganism in general in a short video. I think that's too
it's too broad.
And so what I'd like to do is pull up a few clips that I think are demonstrative of particular topics that I'd be interested in discussing with you guys. Let me just pull. Why not? So she's got a video on street talk, which is interesting, and I'll just pull that up.
Yeah.
It's older.
So when you hear the word vegan, what comes to your mind? What's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Not this.
Not this? Okay.
That's actually what came to mind for me.
Pretentious?
Yeah.
That
cafe is really good though.
Greenhouse? Do you like that?
Yeah.
What makes you feel like that?
I come from Byron Bay, so
there's a lot of vegans.
It's just a pain in the ass.
Just as many pretentious people.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, you think they're mostly vegan or pretentious? Or?
They're just the kind of people that just go around kind of preaching stuff like that. It's like, let me enjoy my full fat coffee and my steak.
What's worse, preaching to humans or killing innocent animals?
So that's an interesting question.
Does it have to be both?
Yeah.
Response.
No.
One or the other. I mean, a false dichotomy.
No. But remember, in order for us to kind of address it, sometimes it's true that people can pigeonhole themselves into a false dilemma. That's true. It's possible. But it's also important that in observation of that, we don't dodge a question. Thank you for affirming my existence. I was considering solipsism. I mean, that would be an interesting discussion we could have. Those two seem to have bias, ill-informed, generalized opinion of vegans. It's possible.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. It's hard to get all the information. It's very.
But here's, in the interest of this channel, what we're trying to do isn't so much look at, did this person make a good argument? Because most people do not make good arguments on the spot without adequate preparation. And even then, most people aren't, they're not formally trained in rigorous symbolic logic. And even then, it's difficult to do. Rather, we're looking at these clips to see if we can extrapolate some kernel of wisdom, even if they motivate an interesting question. In this case, the question is there something to be thought about insofar as the question of which is more important, our inconvenience or the potential suffering of other animals, or should we generalize not just animals, but other things capable of suffering?
Yeah, I feel like the question is quite an interesting one that he asked, sorry. But if they had changed it to discussing veganism or harming or killing animals, I would easily be on the killing animal side. I'm just big against preaching against people. It's the wrong way to get your message across. Just say.
So next time when we do this, are we going to? You think we'll be able to have her on, or
or
anything
else? This has been a kind of fiasco just because it's our first broadcast, so we're getting the hang of this. I expect viewer counts to be low in the beginning, and they'll trickle up across time. Most viewers will not be live, but they'll be after the fact. So that's difficult to predict. I would like to have these people on and talk with them and have a cogent discussion rather than just speak about their videos, because it's very easy to straw man people and it's difficult to have a genuine dialogue.
Yes.
And like, I've only been like studying veganism, a little bit for the last week sort of things to try and be current for this. Whereas those people who you're talking about to have on, they would have had years of expertise in the field of things that are relevant to that.
See, and so to kind of specify this even further, because notice one of the problems I've noticed people have is they'll ask a question that's so broad, it feels almost impossible to answer, and that can sometimes make us wonder if it's even possible in principle to answer the question, right? Like if I start by saying, or if I take a position, if I say guns are good, or I'm pro-gun, like what do you mean pro-gun? Like pro-gun down your sphincter? Like it's gonna depend. It's really gonna depend. And what do you mean by pro, right? What is good? And when these principles aren't sufficiently concretized, it can make things difficult, not only to answer, but also it can create an illusion that we've answered a question that we haven't, right?
Yep. And as you were saying at the start, we're not like ever claiming to have all the answers and things like that. We're hoping to motivate questions. So, that is our goal really, and to get people to have a good discussion and things like that.
All right, so I've got someone I've been waiting on, actually. I'm just going to drop the link.
Hello?
Okay.
Hello there. Let me just, here we go. Go ahead and click that. You prefer Billy or William? I've dropped you a link in the YouTube chat. If you can click that, then we can pull you right up into this video in real time.
That'd be excellent.
Yeah, it'd be nice.
Because this is one of the things that we were hoping to do. It'd be nice to do it in the first one.
Yes, it would. Okay. I've just pasted the link in the chat. I don't know if you can hear me or not. I'm hoping you can. Because once this gets going, I imagine people will catch on. They'll get the gist. But you basically, Billy, if you can see, there's a link that I just sent in the chat for the live YouTube feed. You'll click that link. It will bring you here, and I can then add you to this discourse. It should be pretty straightforward. I'll paste it again in case it's not easy to find. There it is again.
And StreamYard works from the browser. You don't actually need to have anything downloaded to make it work.
Yeah. Indeed. Anyone that wants to make a cogent point or engage in the conversation, we welcome it. That's the idea of the channel. We bring people on. Okay, device not connected, but there he is. There he is. So we should be able to bring him in now. Hey there.
Hello there, gentlemen.
Hello there, sir. Well, looks like
I was waiting to weigh in on things for a bit until you established a little bit of context and more background information about the stream itself, but
yeah, so
we've done a pretty good job of that.
We're trying to make it like accessible to most people, so you don't have to be like a mathematician or a symbolic logician, right? And these two are here to help me there. But we also want to bring rigor. When we obviously haven't dived into anything rigorous right now. We're just trying to open up a dialogue, and I guess this first video is to give people kind of a feel for what it's about. Hopefully.
Yeah.
Right.
So now that you're here, actually, I'd like to play a clip that you can watch with us if you want.
Yeah.
So let me pull this up. We had some technical difficulties with the screen share before. I'm probably going to write some software to streamline this process so that we don't have to do this. We can see all the videos. Okay, here we go.
Arguments for that. It's called the name the trait argument.
He says basically that in order to be consistent in the ideology that eating animals is okay, you need to name a trait that is absent in animals but present in humans, that if absent in humans, we could treat the humans exactly the same way we treat the animals. What is that difference? What do you?
So this is very similar to like the marginal case of a human argument. It's basically saying give some trait such that if that trait was present or absent in an animal and a person had it but then lost it, it would justify treating the person in the same manner. It's comparable to the case of the marginal human, but I want to take this and then contextualize it with one other claim that I found very interesting and that I actually want to make hopefully a point about in this video in a moment. So let me just, here we go. Unfortunately, I'm running this with a laptop, so it's not exactly the fastest thing.
Right.
And it's like the pig was born into a world of pigs. Zero control over that fact. Really?
Oh, no. Okay, here we go. Oh, this is Gordon Ramsay.
Good old Gordon.
Anyone that argues against veganism from a moral standpoint ends up getting very frustrated.
Wait for this, boys.
And the reason they end up getting very frustrated is because it isn't justifiable. The name the trait argument.
Okay, so there we go. We're done, right?
Challenge. I heard a challenge there.
Right.
Not justifiable.
Now, to be clear, this isn't. It looks like an attack, but it's not meant as an attack.
No.
It's and in fact, I think those annoying vegans will link you guys in the description. Come on and talk with us. We'd be happy to have you. You know, you're welcome to the discourse.
Yeah.
And, however, I'd like to dive into this claim. Is kind of you can see how this implicitly relates to it. It undergirds Freelee's ideologies, even if she doesn't directly state it. At least we don't know this is what she thinks.
Yeah. I see that as a challenge, more an inquiry, not as an attack, for sure.
Yeah. So here's what I want to explore: the marginal case of a human. Right. I think there's a problem with the phrasing. Is oftentimes the thinking is this, right? If a person was lacking something, such as an animal, we could then justify the consumption of the person, right?
Right.
Mm.
Well, that's one potential route. I'm just checking the DNA makes up happen. I know the evolution defend themselves. Such we can get to that, Junius. All right. So what I'm thinking is this. I think the problem with the argument is I'm going to make an analogy here. I hope people watching know enough math to like get the analogy. Suppose that I told you to solve the equation sine of x equals x, right? Suppose I told you to just show that there exists at least one solution, right? You could choose 0. That'd be trivial, right? The sine of 0 is 0. Or you could do it the hard way and you could choose the other. There are 2 and only 2 intersections. You'd have to use like a Taylor series and use numerical methods. Turns out it's not an easy solution. But the point is that if you, in the asking of this question, it is possible that you're choosing the second solution rather than the first.
Yeah.
So here's what I mean by that. Let me concretize what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is I claim that it's actually not a necessary nor sufficient condition that a person lack anything for you to actually potentially ethically justify their consumption. You see, so it may not be necessary. And here's how we demonstrate this. Suppose that you have 2 people, and suppose, just for the sake of argument, rather than identical, we say they are equivalent, because identicality and equivalence are not the same thing logically. Suppose that they are equivalent in almost every metric you can imagine relevant to this. It may be an absurd assumption, and it may not be true. Just assume negligible difference, right? And now suppose this. Suppose that both of them want the other person to consume them, which doesn't seem impossible in principle. And suppose further that in the action of this, the death and consumption, that neither the consumer or the person being consumed will suffer as a consequence, which also doesn't seem impossible in principle or weird. But I claim that in this situation, if nobody is, shall we say, suffering, and no one's trying to make anyone else suffer, it seems that we could very easily, without a without any removal.
Yeah, I see what you mean. You could take it from the other angle.
Right?
Yeah. I got you.
So the point I'm making is you can have at least one solution to this system of logical equations, or you could choose the hard one. In other words, it's not that their question doesn't have merit, but it's not that that question means there's not more to the topic being discussed. In other words, I think what's going on here, it would be like if I said sine x equals x, and I'm trying to solve, but I didn't choose 0, right? I chose the other number, whatever it is. Yeah. And it's difficult to do. I can only numerically approximate it. Maybe I'm not good enough at the differential equations or anything like that. So I give up. I'm like, fuck it. It's too difficult. It can't be done, right? And we might have to bleep out that word. I don't think that's allowed on YouTube.
Well, what do you call? Freelee already dropped the F-bombs for us anyways.
Oh
yeah,
crap.
Yeah. There's plenty of that on YouTube. You're fine.
All right. Well, I'm hoping I can get a little, But the point I'm making is I conjecture, okay, I'm not certain about this, but I conjecture that you could easily argue that what's really going on here is, in the case of the marginal human, it's actually neither necessary nor sufficient condition for a human or anything, beyond humans, just those things we would consider to have less. Now, that's just an assumption. That's perhaps one way you could argue it. But the problem with the question and perhaps the argument for veganism of the marginal case is it kind of pigeonholes you into the illusion that that's the only route you can take in arguing, right?
Yeah.
Just like maybe trying to solve that one number in that sine of x equals x equation. If you're not aware that 0 is an option, right? I mean, it pigeonhole you into. That's not really a good example, because there are some equations that. Why assume death is first necessary to consumption? I was just saying worst case scenario, Note that I never said death is necessary and sufficient, but rather I said, obviously we're assuming death precisely because the people watching are going to be thinking, yeah, but you're killing the animals, right? The point we're demonstrating is it doesn't seem impossible for a person to be okay with dying. Maybe it was like some sacrificial weird culture where they both wanted to die for each other and be eaten by the other person, and it was just a coin flip as to who gets the honor, right?
Or a plane crash, and there's a couple of survivors, and one of them is selfless and decides that everyone else can survive without him or with him, not living.
They're just in a survival situation, and they both want the other to survive.
Well, it gets worse. It gets worse, though. Now let's ask a question about a lion, right? So now let's play this game with a lion. What property does a lion have versus a human that justifies it being able to kill the gazelle and consume it, but not you? I mean, are we gonna How are we? In other words,
I don't think that vegans have to necessarily make a claim as to whether lions' actions are justifiable or not. They would just claim that they're not advocating that we go out and kill all the people that are eating animals or punish them. They just don't think that they should. And so likewise, they would take no measure against the lion. They just also don't think that the lion should. There's also the added aspect of lions don't necessarily have the intelligence to be able to find other ways to survive, whereas we do.
Here's my question. If we take that route, right? So let's say that it's true, because that's a good point, and I like it. Let's say that we go with the lions, having some kind of why don't you articulate with a concise statement what you mean, so I don't strawman you? I think I can go somewhere interesting with this.
Okay. So specifically with regards to the first point or the second?
The first, because I think the first point was interesting. You're saying there's a distinction between condoning and chastising, shall we say, right?
Right, exactly. I don't know where Freelee would fall specifically on this issue, but I think that most vegans, at least, are not advocating for some form of legal or other ramifications for people who do eat animals. They're just saying that it's better if you do not practice this.
So here's my response to that. the first problem we have is humans and, lions, they're both categorically, it seems, animals, right, as currently defined biologically. At least last time I took my undergraduate biology class, it seemed that's the classification that we apply. Now, my question then is this. If we're making the distinction between chastising and condoning, right, if we don't condone what lions do, and that's how they survive, do we not condone their survival? I mean, it's not a direct link, right? But it's right. It's not clear where we draw the line between, because here's the weird part. The weird part is we want to minimize suffering, right? Because vegans don't claim to stop all animal suffering, and let's broaden it, not just to animals, but things that can suffer. I assume they want us to minimize. It's almost like a utilitarian claim with a degree of credence, belief, right? To whatever extent is practical. But the problem becomes sometimes that for one thing to flourish, shall we say, or even survive, what if that necessitates the suffering of another? Not necessarily, but what if it, shall we say, predisposes an increase in the probability of said occurrence, right? So like, in the case of the lion and gazelle, like if the lions, because it's not impossible in principles that maybe there's a weird gazelle who's like, take me, daddy, right? And he likes to be eaten. That's fine. It's like, I don't think that's common. You know what I'm saying? I think usually it's, I think they want.
Yeah, I think, so I think that's actually at the heart of their ethical considerations, really, is that with regards to other animals, it's more of a zero-sum game than it is in the interaction between us and other animals. Because it's either the lion or the gazelle, but it's not either us or the animals we consume. It's we could consume other things. Well, and so in order to minimize suffering throughout the system, we don't consume those animals.
Cogent points. Do you prefer William or Billy?
Both are fine, but since I'm going by William on here, William will work for this context.
I would only say the problem with what you're saying, potentially, is it can sometimes, if you're on the precipice of starvation, as you say, be zero sum. But it can also be such that, well, I've had my meal, this week or this day, right? And there's this wounded animal. I guess what I'm saying is it's not always, this is the difficulty of these kind of arguments, because we could also, let me unpack what I'm saying. Because what you're saying can also apply to consider implicit opportunity costs. So suppose that I'm eating food and the amount of that food, and suppose that just for the sake of assumption, all the food I consume is nutritionally complete. I mean, wow, right? It's assume just by assumption that it's assume that it's ethical. Okay. So it's ethical and it's nutritionally complete. Basically, I should, whatever it is, but even if that was the food that I should eat from those conditions, am I not, by consuming that food, denying something else the opportunity cost of its consumption? If it exists. You see, so implicit to what you're saying is the problem with what I would say right here is that it's not necessarily zero sum. If I'm in a house and there's a rodent, family, and I have just enough food to survive, and at what point is it that I give them enough food that they starve me, right? It's not like there's a threshold, but it's not it's not clear, shall I say, at precisely what increment, because it should be quantized at a molecular level. So we should be able to calculate, the kilocalories and all of that. We'd find some point, presumably, but it's not, our inability to know what it is doesn't, impede us from determining that it could exist, of course, just like a system of differential equations,
Right. I think another assumption that underlies this philosophy is that there exists some amount of abundance in the system. And so because of that, if we consume, it isn't necessarily killing something else to do so other than the thing that we are consuming.
Well, be careful. Even if we assume you have all the food you can, right? we still have scarcity because if it takes time to consume, you're still limited, right?
Yeah.
Right. There is
There's
some
still only a
scarcity.
finite amount of resources on the planet.
This is
How
one of
will
the
you
problems
quantify them?
is you actually can't destroy a market based on scarcity in a state of abundance. It doesn't work because you still have the problem of like opportunity cost, and the same could be said here. But what you're saying is
That's true. That's true.
But what you're saying is applicable. It's not that what you're saying doesn't have a kernel of profundity to it. It does. And, you know, all of these things together would plug into a multivariate system. Restaurant at the end of the universe /cow. I'm not sure what that means.
I do. That's the consensual animal that actually begs to be eaten.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's a really funny book, Douglas Adams. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I recommend.
But what I hope this is like opening up and making perhaps more clear is that in each of these arguments, there are underlying axiomatic assumptions. Some of those assumptions are just necessary constraints of discrete systems of logic, and some of them are, you know, epistemological constraints. But some of them are potentially, for some of them, the reasons we don't even need to refer to those things directly as reasons for contention. Meaning, for example, when I looked at the case of the marginal human, right? There's Yusra Nasri. What about the argument for marginal cases? Do you want to come on? Here, Yusra, why don't I send you a link and you can join the conversation?
Cool.
This is what I love about this interaction. You know, it's there we go. There's the link. Come on in.
It is a pretty good, excellent system.
And if you guys have any links that you would like to like propose in this and in YouTube, just drop the link in the YouTube live, and I can pull up that link, be it a study, whatever, and we can look at it in real time. From a viewpoint of basic instinct, we are naturally driven to the value of species and any other species. I think that is given opportunity. See, but that's not necessarily true, Genius, because there are some people who will fucking die for their tiger. So, like, I don't know. See, what I worry about is you have to be careful not to infer individual behaviors from group dynamics, but also not conflate group behaviors with individual behaviors. They don't necessarily translate, and it could risk a potential fallacy of like composition, where like if I said my cells are microscopic and I'm made up of them, so I'm invisible because I can't see my cells, right? I mean,
because you're microscopic.
You have to be careful because a similar problem could occur when we try to make
Great example, by the way.
Yeah,
I love that example of the composition fallacy. That was excellent, Christopher.
Well, hello there.
Hi guys.
No.
Hello.
Hey.
Is it another Christopher?
It's another Christopher.
Yeah.
This one's much better looking than you.
Hi.
Mute your YouTube channel because this is a reverberation.
Yeah, and you're not a slouch either, Christopher.
Can you guys hear?
Yes.
I can't hear her yet.
Room so that we're not so close and the reverberation should cease.
Ah, yeah. True.
Yeah.
Hold a second. Just hand some treats to my son.
What do you dislike? Sources of nutrition, consume processed materials, vitamins, acids, paste.
Yeah.
I'm trying to infer Richard's point regarding nutrition. I'm not really. I mean, there's a relevancy in. I'm not really sure how to interpret that. I don't want to straw man. Richard, could you please clarify what you mean, please? But Junius, it's not that what you said doesn't have merit. It's just that we have to be careful, but like when making claims, particular to groups and individuals, and trying to go from a survival mechanism on some scale to extrapolate making jokes. Ignore me. Well, the problem is, you see, I've just read your comments, so it seems to be faking them. Oh, okay. So me and my wife, we are close together. Okay. The reverberation is horrendous.
Yeah.
Is that like a sexual joke? It could be seen that way. I mean. The topic of Freelee and her lifestyle pertaining to veganism, because this channel is mostly to open up dialogue, invite these people whom we're discussing to the discourse. Here we go. That would be better.
Okay.
It's useful this time too. No imposter.
Yeah.
Nice. I was just getting an idea of her spelling on the name there. I'm trying to memorize that. Should be pretty easy. 5 letters.
I'm trying to connect to the sound.
I can do this.
I can't hear anything.
I can hear you.
There you go. Hey there.
Okay, yeah.
So, is she there?
She's there. She's getting. So this will be a common occurrence for some guests who have better reception and connection than others. So
Yeah, that's true.
we have to get used to perhaps because I don't think I can control that part. Even if I wrote like amazing software, sometimes they're be good.
You'd have to make it a virus so that then it like goes out and does it on everyone else's computer as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting this, but anyway,
you guys want to talk about that? The marginal case of humans. Peter Singer, I don't know if you guys know about him, but he's a philosopher, and he gives the argument of marginal cases in which he says, how does it make sense for us to consume animals if we wouldn't consider
maybe her getting on caused them both to lose connection
that are not as intelligent as other humans.
See, but we did just implicitly address this, although not directly, right? And shall we say, let's broaden the claim rather than just particular to intelligence. Let's say that the claim is specific to whatever sets of features would be justifiable, if any, right? Because if we say there are no sets of features, then the question is meaningless, right? If there are no features that when lost can justify consumption, the question doesn't make sense. It might as well, it borders on assuming its own answer in the phrasing, right? So, because the form of the argument and the form of the question are probably what we're more interested in. Because maybe it's not intelligence, because otherwise, if William comes and attacks me over here, and like hits me on the head, maybe it's enough. It's permissible to like eat me, right? I don't think.
most wouldn't say that.
I mean,
well, do you think that there's like a criteria that they're picking out, like intelligence is a cogent factor to consider?
So, I mean, this is really, I feel like this is an issue that most vegans like Freelee, who are influencers or on YouTube or anything public like that, aren't really addressing the underlying ethical assumptions of their system.
Yeah.
No.
I'm not sure whether they fully considered them or whether they're mostly just operating on a feeling that it is wrong to do harm.
I think that's a tenable conjecture. And by the way, it should be prefaced that much of what we're saying in this video is not meant to be considered anything other than conjecture. I would even, even most proofs that I do, I call conjecture. That's just, I suppose, it would be another video in and of itself. But I just like that to be clear that we are trying to motivate more questions than we're trying to answer. And it's not because we're like pretentious hipsters in a coffee shop.
I did like our coffee though.
Coffee shop, yeah.
I mean, all right, now, I mean, this.
Sorry, that was
a lot of
obvious prompt, I thought.
If Richard hasn't left, thank you for joining us, and hope to see you back.
I'm sorry, Wes, I didn't catch that.
Richard Madsen.
Yeah, thanks, Richard.
Thank you for coming.
So here's another question I want to raise, because we've seen in these videos Freelee talking about like kind of an obligatory ethics, which is something we haven't yet discussed, right?
So what do you mean by obligatory ethics?
Exactly. So well, deeper than that is this, okay? Here's why I ask about obligatory ethics. Suppose we could circumvent the entire problem of what is ethical, right? The question of defining it epistemologically, rigorously axiomatizing a system of logic to formalize it in such a way that we could define an effectively decidable set of ethics, right? So suppose we could do that, right? We determine the membership function. The question is, say I point to William and I say, William, you are evil, right? And we can all agree. We can determine that William is evil. Welcome.
Oh, I'm not sure if we'd agree with that.
Welcome to you. First guest.
No, I'm evil.
It's decided.
It is
Some
decided.
things you just don't question. So
it's very quiet for someone so evil.
But here's the problem. What if we just shrug? Okay. See, the problem is this. Even if we could decide what was ethical, is that enough to demonstrate why we should care about ethics? And you see, what I claim is that neither Freelee nor any of the vegans that we've actually watched, and this goes right to your point of people missing the underlying suppositions implicit in their ethics, that inclusive in that is also the problem of motive, which is to say, why should we care about ethics? And so suppose we could determine that, yeah, you're a piece of shit, you eat animals, you kill them, you know, why should we care? And see, hidden in Freelee and other vegan struggle is implicitly this problem. It's not just that people don't understand ethics, but it's also the problem of why should we kiss it to this.
Right. And I think actually with Freelee specifically, she realizes that a lot of people aren't going to care about it purely from the ethical perspective. And so that's why a big part of her public presence is the diet aspect, because that is motivational to a lot of her audience. And so a huge part of what she does is about losing weight, keeping it off, remaining healthy in an otherwise unhealthy world. And she sees that as a more practical motivator than ethics, I think, in some cases.
Could be. And I think there's some tenability to what you're saying, which is why when we looked at these clips, I tried not to interpret them directly as claims. Because maybe, like, for example, much of our channel, you know, like, if you look at what we're doing, some of it's not rational. And that's purposeful, which is weird, because we're trying to appeal to an audience in such a manner that it's accessible, right? So Junius is definitely evil because he puts ketchup in his mac and cheese. No, that's you're a psychopath then. It's worse. I'm afraid it's worse.
There's no coming back from that.
The vegans who are focused more on the health aspects than the actual ethics. But I actually think that even in the case of when people focus on the health aspect, they kind of look at it as a zero-sum game. Like, if you eliminate a certain food group, then you are like healthier than if you were to include that food group. But really,
I mean,
from what I understand of nutrition, it's a lot more complex than that. It's multifaceted. It's not as simple as cutting out the entire food group.
Sometimes it is a zero-sum game in the sense that I bet you if I start adding mercury to your food, right, it's not going to go well.
Is that adding what to it?
Mercury?
If I start adding mercury to your food, I don't think it's going to go well. You know, so sometimes you're right, it's multi simple as remove this or add that, but sometimes it is. You know, it's if I
well, yeah, I mean,
take
there's
a
certain
teaspoon
things that if we were to consume,
neutron power and feed that to you, I don't think it would go well.
Yeah, the things that I seem to have found from the research that I did in the small amount of time that I did was that, like, there are things that we get from all different sources. We can get all these different amino acids and proteins and all that sorts of things. When we when we make our diet very, very particular, we've got to be very careful that we're not cutting out things that are necessary. So we've got to be extra cautious on that, I think.
I think most people would agree to that statement. Could you please repeat that, Yusra?
It depends on what you mean by necessary.
Yeah.
Because
I don't think you mentioned it in the logic.
Yeah, maybe I should have said beneficial instead of necessary.
You're not saying it's a necessary condition, right? You're not saying P implies Q.
No.
Well, it's necessary. It's a question of what it's necessary for. Because if we're talking about survival,
we don't need as much for survival, but if we want to actually have an optimum human
then good nutrition.
That's right. And this is important.
Exactly right.
Like, this is an important point to touch on because I didn't kick her, by the way. She just dropped. There she goes again. I could though. I could do it to any one of you. Like, watch this. See Wes? Watch him disappear. Gone. See that? Such power. Yeah,
you meant to go whoa at the end of that.
That's fine. Meat itself, from an evolution standpoint, has the necessary in development for higher brain function. I'm not sure. Be very careful with that thinking, Junius. You have to. All right, we're going to get into some neuroanatomy here. Okay, there are many ways that you can actually form neuroconnections. Junius, do you ever play Path of Exile? I'm going to give you an analogy. Do you play Path of Exile? I'm going to assume you do. I hope this analogy works. Genes. So switch and Hox genes work in such a manner that the permutation and order of what nodes you hit on that tree matters beyond what the game can actually capture. That is to say, you can have the same skill tree, but if you had even more depth in Path of Exile, okay, this is a bad analogy. Basically what I'm saying is you can have the same set of genes, but the order in which they are permuted and configured can fundamentally change what occurs insofar as the expression of those genes in the environment is concerned. So what I'm trying to say is this has implications that there are many ways to have something physically instantiated like a brain beyond just what we might think in terms of a mammalia or things like that. So
can I add to what Junius was saying though?
Perhaps for our brain.
Because he was touching on a thing that the other doctor mentioned. The one that had that really strange voice.
Dr. Michael Greger?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Dr. Michael Greger. I know you as Dr. Strange Voice.
Duncan at 1 minute 6 seconds has called you out, Dr. Michael Greger. Just remember that. He's got a personal problem with you.
But it kept me interested in what he was saying, and so he was saying, because I watched that whole vid, and he was saying that currently, because people hadn't realized some of the importance of some things in the vegan, in the vegetarian/vegan lifestyle, that they suffered more from Alzheimer's and things like that later in life. That's what he was saying.
Neurodegenerative diseases resulting from what is conjectured to be an imbalance of, I don't know the full set of macro and micronutrients, and I'm not going to try claiming it because I'm not a dietitian. This is why I think we should have people with competence on this subject.
Yeah, it would be great.
The logic, the mathematics, the form of their argument, but as far as the specifics of like the information pertaining to that subject, I think it would be disingenuous to try to explain that in a topic that I haven't, and this isn't to say I don't have an inkling. I mean, I've taken undergraduate courses in it, I've studied it, but I understand enough to know that I don't understand enough to make a competent argument.
Exactly right. And even the doctor in the video himself, like as a good doctor should, or good scientist rather, didn't say this is 100% certain, but he was saying it looks like from what we can gather the data that we have, You know what I mean? Like making those 100% claims is always a bit of a worry for anyone.
Any scientist who says we're 100% certain.
Exactly right. Ignore that scientist.
The problem is I'm not sure if I would have to look at the actual studies that he was drawing from to make those conclusions, because even if he's not stating something that's 100%, there's a lot of ways that you can incorrectly interpret data.
That's right.
Yes, that's something that Christopher and himself discussed a bit.
Or correlate things that shouldn't be correlated, or that shouldn't be related because of correlation into a
because there's so many factors,
cause and effect thing. So
there's so many hidden factors in people's lifestyle that are hard to account for and things like that. So I definitely agree with what you're saying there. And he was saying it was a new study as well. So it was like, it is like the cutting edge of what he's doing at the moment. They don't know for certain, no scientist ever does, but they're even less sure because they don't even have very many studies on it yet, because they've only got 1 or 2 because they've just started studying it.
Yeah, but I was going to say,
there's not a lot of information available.
Exactly right.
on this yet. And another aspect is that obviously most people aren't starting their lives in this diet. And so it's an acquired diet, and we don't know how the body necessarily reacts to a change in diet like this. And it could be that transitioning from a meat-eating diet into a vegan diet is not good for the body, because continuing to eat meat might bring about some biological mechanism that is a natural defense against some of the diseases that eating meat have been related to, such as colon cancer or other diseases that they were discussing. It could be that continuing to eat meat increases the body's natural defense mechanisms against those things. And if you stop doing it, then it increases your chances of getting it. And so there's a lot of aspects that aren't really taken into consideration.
I would say, for example, look at gut bacteria, right? The composition of what you eat can directly influence gut bacteria, which can have direct impacts potentially on your brain function. But again, I don't think we should be making claims like this, guys, because I don't think any of us know enough about the subject to make, like, if you want to.
No, we're actually sort of making the claim that, we don't know, we can't make a claim.
I'm just saying we should make sure that this is prefaced as conjecture. If and when it's like on the precipice of the limits of what we're saying, simply because, and by the way, at the beginning of the video, William, what I've been trying to tell you is this was the first concern I had, because I've actually read through most of these studies and looked at from a mathematical perspective with a lot of real analysis and statistical inference. And I found that none of the studies were sufficiently rigorous for me to, like, with any confidence, really, at least to that, to a degree of rigor in, like, say a study in physics, that even there I find it, like, not as high. I couldn't stand on any of the premises.
Duncan, can you hear Christopher well? Because I actually can't hear him. I can only hear you talking. So it's like a very incomplete discussion here.
Okay, well that explains.
Yeah, you gotta go wee, Dave. Yeah. Sorry, that's not just.
How about this? You can perhaps listen.
I'm not sure why that would be. I don't know if he has his audio muted to me or.
No.
I don't really know what's going on, but I can only hear you talking. Okay.
Only hear me. Jesus Christ, I've been quite. Oh, sorry, I've been quite silent.
It's a mental.
Okay, now I can hear you, Sray. Yeah.
Okay.
He's falling,
but I still can't hear Christopher. Not sure.
Let's try something. We're gonna try something real quick. Okay, we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna add him back. How's that? Is that any better?
Holy shivers. Wow, man. It's gone from sunny to rain to tornado. Jesus.
Is that any better?
As far as Freelee,
I can hear everyone, but there's like an echo sound on my end. I don't know. It's a little bit strange. But,
yeah, I think that's from you and Christopher's feed being in the same,
no, she's in a
close location, I guess.
Let's try something real quick.
I'm not sure because you're in the other room.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yep.
Verizon guy.
William, can you hear Christopher now?
I still cannot, and I'm not sure why.
That's strange.
It's strange. I could leave and come back possibly, and resetting my connection might help. Here.
Yeah, let's try that.
Okay, back to Freelee's diet and stuff. We never, as far as inconsistencies in the studies, we never even, I don't think anybody even said exercise. People that are on a diet will often be exercising way more than the meat eater. So even if vegan diet does come out better, how much is it because of their improved diet and eating, I think you said before, not eating canned foods, but eating fresh vegetables, fresh fruit.
Yeah, that's right, like not smoking and drinking. So all those lifestyle factors that they have that come along with being a vegan, they often tend to be like, what do you call it? Freelee, one of her first things that she became sort of like famous for was doing a bicycle ride. Yes. And so shows a predisposition towards exercise sort of things like that. And I do find that they do tend to, like my mum is a vegetarian, and she's super into exercise, sort of things like that. I'm a meat eater. I don't care. I should really get around to exercise.
Because like there are certain, it's true, there are certain life factors, and they're not really factors.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good point. I mean, I wonder how
that's exactly right.
the study would look if they actually did.
Well, that's the things that Christopher linked in one of the videos that he linked earlier on before, was it was saying it doesn't take into account all these different factors and things like that. And that's how I was saying before about how there's only a few studies that have actually come out fairly recently that they've actually managed to try and zoom in on the thing better. They'll still have areas that they're missing and things like that, but now they are actually trying to take a lot more things into consideration. But yeah, it's definitely a factor. And it's a factor that hasn't been involved in many of the studies until recently.
We're safer like looking at the molecular chemistry of some substances. William, can you hear me now?
I can, yeah.
Okay. We're safer looking at some molecular chemical processes that we can safely say, okay, it's probably not a good idea for us to consume those. Like mercury, for example. Like most people,
not too much.
Or lead, right?
Yeah.
It's probably not going to go well. But those instances are not common, you know, and usually what we're banking on is the molecular carbon-based chemistry, so the organic chemistry. We can usually make strong inferences just from those chemical reactions. But if and when it's not possible for us to, you know, reduce it to a kind of like simplified chemical argument, then it becomes highly complex, right? And so I think that we've kind of touched on that, and so I don't think it'll be very fruitful for us in this video to
go much further into it.
The diet, the nutrition. I would rather bring on either from UNC Chapel Hill, some of my colleagues, or from the people, you know, Stephanie Buttermore, Dr. Rhonda Patrick, Dr. Michael Greger, maybe Unnatural Vegan. You know, she'd also be interested. She's not, you know, a doctor. She probably.
And of course, Freelee herself is more than welcome. I know we said at the start, but I'm reiterating. Yep.
Yes, that's right. We'd rather bring like discourse with them
I think
than.
Freelee actually has had any.
I don't know, but that doesn't mean that she can't raise interesting questions.
Yeah, and also since she's such a what do you call it? Since she's such a spokesperson for the cause, if we could get her on and have a nutritionist on as well, we could maybe help her with her cause or something. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like she might learn stuff.
That's an interesting point, you know. I mean, and I think there's been a lot of like. I think in this video, what would be most pertinent, or perhaps shall we say productive, would be for us to focus on some of the ethical implications. Just because, like I said, I think that that's another, and this will probably be more like a series of videos. We can't possibly tackle this topic in one video, let alone 5, let alone 10. You know, we're motivating, I would conjecture, more questions than we can potentially answer.
Yeah.
So I just want to say, I think it would be useful to kind of go back to the marginal cases. Are you guys familiar with the argument for marginal cases that vegans, some vegans propose?
I think we've addressed that in a way.
We've addressed that? Okay.
So why don't we...
Because I think that's just a really interesting one to consider.
Something that I'm interested in is the potential opportunity cost associated with veganism that is implicit and underlies much of the philosophy, as well as the question I motivated earlier, which is why should we care about veganism? Which implicitly informs us to the question of why we should care about ethics, right? Because even if we could determine that we should, you know, that it would be ethical to be vegan, how do we get people to care?
Yeah.
Right, because some people would say, you know, I don't care about the chickens that die, you know, like why should I even care? You know, I just want to eat. I like how it tastes. Like, why should I care about it? And I think that's a whole different approach to take, though. And I think it's a lot more complex than people would think.
Junius has an interesting point of contention. You say eating too much meat has been linked to colon cancer, among other things that cause discomfort when you have to eat the hell out of a lot of meat every day. Well, again, the problem. So notice that implicit in that. Welcome to the forum. I see the stream, very refreshing. So one of the problems with like Junius's conjecture here is notice that the very claim that they're linked, but then the conjecture that it will take a lot of meat at the same breath those two things already are potentially contentious with each other as premises. That is to say, suppose that I tell you that there is a link between, I don't know, walking and some musculoskeletal disorder, right? But suppose I also make the contingency that it would require a great amount of walking, right?
Indeed.
But then if you compound that in a society where, say, a lot of people are sedentary, and you then take from that a study showing this link, it's not exactly clear how strongly this link has been established beyond. So in other words, you can go deeper into criticizing data points beyond, okay, we don't know, confounding variables. That's one layer. You can go another layer and looking at the difficulty of interpreting data points, even if they're gathered correctly, or shall we say accurately, gathered competently.
Because in the example that you just, saying about how, like, I know it's a bit hypothetical saying that the walking causes the back problems or whatever like that, but exactly to your point, it's like we don't know whether it's actually the walking that's causing the back problems or whether it's the fact that people have been living a sedentary lifestyle, and since they've been doing that, now the walking is causing problems, whereas if they'd been walking the whole time, it wouldn't have caused problems. Is that where you go?
Well, but we also have to keep in mind, oh, Larry's on. You want to bring him in? Let's bring him on the train.
Bring him in. Yeah.
All right, here we go.
In the link if you'd like to. He noted correlation, not causation. That's part of what you were saying before that.
What I'm getting at is something.
You were saying other things, so.
What I'm trying to get at is something potentially more problematic, which is I'm trying to think about how to articulate this. We don't really have a theory of causation. So when people say correlation doesn't imply causation, what do you mean by causation?
Yeah.
You see, because it's innocuous, but people like to say this as though it's gospel, right? They like, I don't think so. It's not that's not how it's going to go around here. Just a spectator. We'll see about that.
Yeah.
Come to the dark side. Okay, so but I was going to say that, like, it sounds like a very authoritarian, and when I say authoritarian, I don't mean like, maybe that's not a good word. It sounds like a robust thing. Correlation doesn't imply causation, except when you realize that people who say that seldom ever classify or even define what they mean by causation. And it's a fact in formal logic and mathematics that there is no definition for causation, nor in science have we sufficiently defined it, to any adequate extent. So what do you mean? Like, if you can't define the thing, so you have no effectively decidable set of parameters, pertaining to the thing, which to determine whether or not a thing has those properties, right? So how can you then establish that a correlation can't imply causation if you don't have a theory of causation? Of course, this doesn't mean you can, but it also doesn't give you leverage in the other direction either.
Because correlation does not mean causation, but it doesn't mean not causation either. So
it goes to a third thing that is covered both, or a lot of different dynamics there that you just don't know without a lot of research. And a lot
it doesn't establish either or.
Yeah.
And Dr. John Roberts in the UNC Department of Philosophy, he's written his own book. He does a lot of study about conjectures about what it means for the laws of physics to be laws. Because as it turns out, those are, assumptions that those will persist. What does it mean for something to be a physical law? What are the properties of laws? And these are innocuous, hidden assumptions implicit in many of the claims as well, right? Like, for example, we'd like to say that. So it's not obvious, but when another thing that comes up is people often will conjecture that animals don't have souls, right? But if we broaden what we mean by a soul to say personhood, the question now that might be presented before us is, well, what constitutes a person?
Yeah. Right. Like, what are the parameters or features that somebody would have?
What are the properties of personhood, right?
Remember we were talking about the traits that an animal doesn't have that a human does have. I was always tempted to throw out, is human rights a trait? But because that's one of those animals don't have that humans do have, kind of conclusively done dust.
There is animal rights, they just get used.
Yeah, they have a different set of rights as well.
too often they are abused, and that is sad. And I can
just wait. It's going to get worse. It's going to get worse.
And remember, we were talking about how this could span many things. Remember how I was talking about the ethical treatment of animals and things like that, and how we might make a thing on that at some point? I would definitely like to go there.
But here's what I'm trying to motivate. Okay, it's not obvious that the question of what a person is pertinent to this ethical, set of inquiries, because causation means a cause producing an event. That's circular. You can't define causation as a cause producing an event. And furthermore, that's not well defined in a quantum level. But that's a good point. That's a good attempt, Lacey. Is it Lacey?
It's Larry.
That's not Larry. Okay, so Larry is Lacey.
Larry.
You can't. All right. So some people have tried to define causation as the satisfaction of conditionals across a Cauchy sequence of times for all times t in a closed interval. Okay, they've tried to to add formal. So the idea is you take a compact closed set. So basically, for any point on the real number line, right? Let this be an imagined interval of time. You pick a point, and the claim is that for any point you pick, you can always pick another point, and there's always a point between them. So you can infinitely go in, and you'll never find a hole in that line, right? It's compact and dense. And by dense, we mean that any sequence of points in that line, or subset of the line, you will have always a convergent subsequence. Convergent to a point on the line. And you might wonder why we care about subsequences, but because maybe you have the sequence 1 0 1 0 1 0 1 0. It's still, you can choose 0 0 0 subsequence, skip all the ones in that sequence and it will converge to 0, or vice versa. So it's called a compact metrized or complete metric space. And you can define across all times t, associate with that a conditional, and then for any such time t on a compact metrized space associated with time, allow the satisfaction of that conditional over that interval of time for all times, and associate with, for any such time, a Cauchy sequence convergent to that time with the satisfaction of the conditional. And you can try to argue that as causation. But even that's not clear, because it doesn't actually establish for you the order you're looking for, does it?
So can you explain how the issue of causation ties into why should we care about ethics? Like how can viewers connect those two ideas together?
Excellent.
I'm getting in trouble. Who is Forum Arcade?
Forum Arcade?
Yeah, who's that? He says I've dragged on too long on this. This person is banned.
Oh yeah, I got another one for you. Yeah, I'm sure my son might actually agree with it.
Alan, he's one of my friends. Alan, do you want to come on? You want to come on? By the way, it's not. Listen, Junius. It's not that there's no concise definition. It's just that when you plumb its depths, you will find it lacking. That's the best way. For the uninitiated in formal logic, the best way I can say it is that you will find it lacking in robustness when you try to define causation. You want to come on, Alan? We'd be happy to have you. If you want to, I'm just going to drop this link. So this link, it's not a flaw in the definition necessarily. Our inability to define it doesn't mean the definition is flawed, right? It just means we don't know. Come at us, bro. I mean, it could be that it could be impossible to define. It could be that our definitions are flawed. They're not mutually exclusive, right? It could be impossible to find, and we have a flawed definition for it. But of course, then the we have a definition for may not refer to the same thing. But I digress. I think that the point don't take away from this, including what I just said as a conclusion. Maybe I should just give my response as a non-answer, right? Just to. I don't know. Even that I don't know. That I don't know. That and then create a sequence of I don't knows, right? It seems that my conjecture about my own state of knowing is the propositional truth claim. But on the subject of causation, it's just the point I'm making is when people tell you innocuously, insofar as it relates to ethics and diet in this case, I don't know will suffice. I don't know a lot of things, Lil. I mean, it seems, the danger is if you don't know a lot of things or anything, it's difficult to assert it because then is it necessary or sufficient that you know something about yourself to know that you don't know? It's not clear. All right, so we have someone else on. Let's go ahead and add this person. There we go.
Hey,
there.
what's up?
Hi, Alan. How are you? Welcome to the party.
I am well.
Hi,
I am
Alan.
on my phone, so I do not know how well this is going to work, if it's going to be optimized for being on a phone.
I think it's going well thus far.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm on phone too, so.
Excellent. Good.
Good.
Yeah, I was.
Some of us look better than others, you know.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, like, okay, I have feedback. Whatever camera Duncan is using is the camera everyone should be using, because it's been glitching out for.
Well,
Yes,
Duncan is better looking than us, so that can't be helped. You know, it's
But no,
obvious.
it's not better looking. I mean, YouTube doesn't discriminate
are you
on. I'm going
outside?
to increase the refresh rate for people who are better looking.
Thanks for joining the dark side. We have cookies.
Yes.
So thank you for the compliment.
Yeah, well,
it wasn't a compliment. I was being facetious.
Well, I wasn't talking to you.
Yes, Christopher. Not everything is about you. Okay.
Watch this, Duncan. Watch this, Duncan. Yeah, see that?
He just leaves.
Okay, so I shared a link to a study in the private chat. If you guys want to look at that, it's a paper that proposes that, according to the principle of least harm, it may actually be harmful to animals as a whole. And by this, they mean that we would
least
have
harm.
Yes. So this is an idea that as long as we can minimize the harm, the total number of animals that we're harming in a system using a certain method of consumption across the board, then that is the most moral thing to do. If you assume that, which is probably the implicit assumption that's motivating a lot of these ideas.
Where do you want me to go in the study? I'm going to share this.
So specifically on page 389.
389, we're there.
Yeah, or page 3 of the actual study. But so he's discussing how he's looked at some other studies that apparently purport that you would be killing more animals with the amount of farmland you would have to create to maintain a solely vegan diet for the entire population than you would just by killing them and eating them.
Let's see. So all right, you guys can see what I'm reading, right? This decrease attributed to both migration out of the field and to mortality, okay? They estimated the mortality rate to be 52%. In another study, I don't know what that's short for, 1971, I guess that's referring to the study, reported the mortality rate of the Polynesian rats was 77% during the harvest of sugarcane in Hawaii. These are estimated mortality rates for only a single species and for only a single operation, i.e. harvesting. Therefore, an estimate somewhere between 52 and 77%, say 60% for animals of all killed during the production, it would be reasonable. If we multiply the population density showed mortality rate, that equals 15 animals each year. This is true, however many animals would die annually in the production of vegan diet. There are 120 million Western units each year. If all of that land was used to produce crops to support the vegan diet, 50 animals killed per year, produce vegan diet in the USA. Okay, so basically the claim, let's make sure I understand this. The claim is that counterintuitively, if we use agriculture as currently understood, that's one of the weaknesses of this article, is that it does presuppose technological constraints. Implicit in this agriculture that we currently understand will be a mortality rate of animals imposed as an opportunity cost, right? But I see a deeper question. Remove, let's make this even better. Let's suppose that it was cheap and that this didn't occur, because there's a stronger claim here that needs to be considered, which is this. How do you justify if and when there's an opportunity cost implicit, if such a thing exists? That is, if Alan and I are in a room and let's say there's only enough kilocalories in a particular food over a partition of time that it's going to be him or me, right? Then
William breathes a sigh of relief.
So Junius says we actually have a lot of uninhabited land. All right, to be clear, the claim is not about the amount of uninhabited land. The claim is about, by the way, uninhabited land. Inhabited by who? Insects? You got to be careful there. I mean,
animals inhabit everything.
Yeah.
I believe he excludes insects from the measurement of harm to the system from this, but he's talking specifically about animals of the field. So
then
you're harvesting crops in a field, you're killing rabbits, you're killing snakes,
killing birds by taking away their
birds.
You're killing fields.
Yeah. And
killing
so
fields.
yeah, they pretty much are. And so in order to harvest
really
the
are.
amount of crops needed to feed the entire population of just the United States, you would be killing more animals than we're currently consuming.
Which is this is similar to the question I raised earlier, right? But I think the weakness of this argument is that it hinges upon current technological constraints.
That's definitely the weakness. That's huge, because if we could avoid killing those animals, then
So here's an example. If we genetically engineer
if we built our farms in like a high rise, that would actually minimize the footprint that it would be making.
No. You got to be more. Let's get creative, like that video.
Even more technical, right?
Let's get creative. Here's the idea. If you can genetically engineer algae in such a manner that they're actually pro biodiversity while producing some food supply as a byproduct of, say, a photosynthesis.
Oh, that is nice.
Then you can promote biodiversity while
you're actually feeding the natives.
But in the system of differential equations that define these phenomenon, only to a degree that the carrying capacity of the ecosystem that exists can support. So there's still an opportunity cost. You see, it's not. You can't dispute those constraints of the environment, but it's not necessarily true that you have to produce a system that will not proliferate biodiversity. It's not necessarily true. But so in other words, how the populations grow together in imagine a system of differential equations is pertinent to this question and not included in this analysis. So in other words, it's all of these things together make this a very contextual argument that, while relevant, could fundamentally change in the future.
Yes, of course.
Those were
really
a lot
an
of words to say that.
It's just an exercise in practicality, essentially, of the time. And so as far as what we should be doing right now, it attempts to make a statement as to that, but it doesn't really say what we should be doing in an ideal technological situation.
That's right. David. So here's an idea then, but let's be charitable and say, because I think most vegans for this would just say, well, look, we can optimize and improve these technologies, right? They would probably want to take that easy route, even though I think it's a very important point, because ought often implies can. But let us again assume that we can find some technological means of minimizing the amount of harm, right? In other words, maybe it's not through agriculture, but some other means, right? Maybe we start to produce photosynthesizing, asexually replicating algae that promote biodiversity, but also produce a byproduct through synthesis that we can consume, right? And other things can consume. So something like that. And if we consider those things, then the question I have is, how do you circumvent the deeper problem, which is kind of hidden, which is what I kind of motivated with Alan and I, which is that what about the implicit opportunity cost of, for all the food you consume, you've denied some of the thing an equivalent amount of kilocalories of energy. Right. So,
well, I have something to say about that, actually, Christopher. I think.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't think the opportunity cost type of situation is necessarily a zero-sum game. So it's not as clear, like, while two organisms alive, the extent of which the opportunity cost is occurring. Like, for example, if you think about I can give you a hypothetical, for example, that's not that is more of a zero-sum game that's not comparable to the situation that you're giving right now. Like, consider a situation of people locked in a room, and if one person exits the room, that would prevent the other person from exiting, right? Now they're a zero-sum game, because as soon as one person exits the room, that would lock the door, and the person that's in the room would be in there forever, presumably. This is a hypothetical situation. So, but the fact of the matter of two organisms consuming food doesn't seem to be as clear-cut as that.
Well, here's the thing. It's how you approach the problem. You can't look at it as one snippet in time, but across time. So in other words, take the cumulative sum of a sufficient amount of kilocalories that would be necessary for another organism, right? If you partition the total consumption of kilocalories in your lifetime, you could then equate that to the necessary kilocalories for another type of organism. So look at a whale, for example. The amount of plankton that they consume, right? You can literally turn it into a physics argument. But here's the problem, really, is implicit in this question, and it's not so much an answer. I want to make this clear. I'm not even sure if this is directly relevant, but it is in the background. It is often not discussed. There's an implicit opportunity cost potentially in that it's not, but we don't know because. So what I mean by it's in the background is we don't even know if such a thing as an opportunity cost is well defined. Like, what does it mean to say that something that didn't happen could have occurred?
Right. That's kind of the direction I was pointing.
Right. And this goes back to the difficulty of like defining a theory of causation. If it didn't happen, is that evidence that it couldn't have? If it did happen, is that evidence it had to? Or vice versa? Either way, it's difficult and not well defined. And so when I say opportunity, that arguing that way makes sense, right? But at the same breath, it seems, that an implicit opportunity cost in lieu of your consumption of kilocalories will, in a system of scarcity, proliferate what's known as a Pareto distribution. I think William will be familiar with this. Are you familiar with Pareto distributions?
I've heard of it, yeah.
You know, like the 1/x function?
Yeah.
It basically, on the y-axis is like the percentage of people, and on the x-axis is the amount. So stars, for example, have a solar mass that's Pareto distributed, where the fewest number have the greatest solar mass.
Right.
So and that's just because of the opportunity cost they impose on other stars in the accretion disk, in the protostar and formation in the nebulous cloud after, in that star formation process. As they accrue more matter and develop a stronger gravity field, it imposes an opportunity cost on other stars. And so that's why wealth is Pareto distributed. So what I'm trying to say is in some systems of scarcity, when the conditions are right, due to the scarcity and the nature of distribution, you often have a Pareto distribution. And how that relates to this is the reason I asked this question of implicit opportunity cost, right, is it implies that you will always have a majority impact from a minority amount. So what does that? In other words, is it necessary that everybody has to ascribe to veganism, or just those small percentage of people that are mostly responsible for the animal cruelty? In other words, it's not. Would it even follow that everyone has to go vegan? Is what I'm saying. Because sometimes counterintuitively, the way to maximize the system of equations is not for everybody to actually participate in the minimization process.
I see what you're saying. I mean, the same argument could be said for like global warming, for example, right? Like, only if the wealthiest countries mitigate the amount of electricity and other things that they use, this would have an effect of reducing dramatically the amount of CO2 is produced in the environment. And someone could say the same of like a situation in terms of, is there countries or people that are contributing most to the consumption of animal products, and as a result, is it necessary that everyone does?
I think in this case, though, it would lead to pretty much the same thing, because the people that we're talking about having to switch over to these ideas are the people who are at the heads of like the meat, dairy, and egg industries, these multi-billion-dollar industries with farms all across nations that are churning out these products. And
but you agree that on the Pareto distribution, these would be those people on the 1/x axis far out here who, percentage-wise, the people are the smallest composition, but in terms of the magnitude of their impact, have the largest input, right? That's what I'm people.
But I also think that if you were able to, switch their ideals so that they abandoned their companies and their wealth and were just like, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore because my ideals have changed, other people will come in and fill that void. Or even if they didn't, if we removed all of those meat products, all that distribution from the world, then inadvertently everyone would end up having to either find ways of taking care of themselves, or they would become vegan due to necessity because they'd no longer have access to all these animal products anymore.
Let us say that these conjectures are possible, but contextual, right? In other words, they are potentially counterexamples to any particular claim of how this will unfold, because systems of differential equations that are multivariate are highly sensitive to initial conditions, if and when you try to approximate a solution. So what I would like actually is to ask you guys then, because a lot of these things seem to hinge on why we should care about veganism. So my question to you guys would be, why should we care?
It's not a straightforward.
High question to ask a non-vegan here.
I'm going to pull myself from the conversation for a moment and see what you guys discuss.
All right.
I care about. Okay. I care about for the ethical perspective more than dietary is important too, but I care for the ethical, whether we're harming animals or not. But all that would take for me to go ahead and eat meat is to show that I can do it humanely.
Yeah, me and Wes have talked about this a little bit before, where it's like, if we could actually unite with the vegans and actually try and get a movement where we treat animals more humanely that are going to actually become food, whilst not being a vegan, I don't know if I'll actually become a vegan unless it's sort of necessary, then I would be on board with the idea of more humane treatment for the animals. Like I get free range eggs and stuff like that because I approve of that kind of method of farming sort of things.
So we need pasture cows.
That was the terminology that we came up with, wasn't it?
We talked about
Yeah. So it happens like free-range cows and free-range pigs.
To me, is when I consider the question, why should we care? And I will say that the first thing that comes to my mind is the issue of suffering. If it's true that other animals experience consciousness, then what is the differentiating factor that would allow me to distinguish other human beings? Like, most people would prima facie say that it's unethical to eat a human being. So why should I give special treatment to over another type of species? What is it that makes humans special? And, right? So I don't know. But I mean, that's kind of what occurs to me.
I think about that too, and I don't know where to. On Sapiens is usually where I go in personhood, but there's no point where you say this is definitely sapient and this isn't. There's we don't have any way to gauge that of how sapient a cow is or a pork or pig.
For me, I sort of approach it from the other angle. And I'm not saying that you're wrong, Yusra, not at all.
No.
But for me, I'm an animal. Animals eat animals. That's how we do. And like I said before, I mean, it's like what you're saying is like, what makes humans so special to animals that we can't?
Right.
Yeah, but no, we're not special. We're just animals, and animals do their thing. And like so, like when Christopher was saying before about how that you could have a consensual cannibalism, and that's fine. And I was like, yeah, that's fine because that's just animals eating animals. And it comes back to that whole thing. It's like, I don't put humans up on a huge pedestal in that way. So therefore, ask me why we're on that pedestal how do I justify us being on that pedestal? I'm like, I don't. I'm still trying to figure out why we're there, so I can't actually say why we're there.
I think too that one of the interesting things about this argument is that there's actually a pretty good reason not to care. The more morally invested that we become in the ethical treatment of animals, the harder it is for us as the people who actually have to slaughter them and send them out and put them on people's tables. It becomes harder for those people to actually do their jobs. So the industry has taught itself over time to care less, to do its job more effectively.
Without going insane. Fair enough.
Freelee made some points on that.
The problem here is we can apply this logic to the Holocaust members, right? Like, well, we need this.
I was thinking the same thing.
No, I'm not saying I don't want to hang you out to dry here, because I think there's a kernel of wisdom in what you're saying, though. You're saying that implicit in this problem is also our own suffering, not just theirs.
And I mean, like, these industries exist for a reason, and part of that reason is profit, but the more substantial underlying reason is to keep people well fed and to provide them with these easily accessible means of nourishment. And in order to do that more effectively, we've become very good at eliminating care for the animals from the equation. We just need to reach an end product and reach it as efficiently as possible.
Right. So what you're saying is not that there couldn't be better ways to do it, but not that we couldn't say, grow meat from stem cells, right? Not that there aren't alternatives. What you're saying is whatever the transition is, given the current placement of pieces on the chessboard and how that could affect the economy, and by the micro implications, the macro implication of the economy, and by that economic structure, the ethical implications on people's potential suffering, like all of those potential things, if and when we transition, how is important. Is that a fair summary of what you're conjecturing?
I mean, how is certainly important, because, you can't
Careful
just
with that word here. Certain.
You can't just take it all away. You can't just say that, if we just get rid of this, the implications of that would be comparably disastrous to the amount of suffering that we perceive these animals to be undergoing, the amount of suffering that it would now cause to shake up human industry and everything in that way. I do think that there are alternatives, and we could transition to a better means of doing things with more attention giving to ethics and moral treatment of animals. But I think that the manner in which the industry has established itself today and grown to the size that it has is completely by not focusing on the moral implications.
Right. So you're sort of saying to accommodate the scale of economy that they've got at the moment, desensitization was required on the end of the people who are actually producing. So things like ethical behavior may have gotten lost, and that's how come we get battery farms and things like that.
Yeah. I mean,
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
No. And I was just going to say, this is something that we haven't touched on here about the veganism thing. That's actually kind of important. Is that it's actually for me, if I was to go vegan right now, it would cost me more than I could afford if I was to make my whole family, me, my wife, my son, all go vegan. The cost of that at the moment is just so, so much higher than to not have a vegan diet, to be more omnivorous.
Well, I don't know about that, actually. Now, veganism might imply all organic and non-GMO foods, and that can certainly increase the costs pretty substantially. But I have found, at least in my own personal experience, that I am accidentally a lot more vegetarian than I used to be, because rice and beans are the cheapest thing that you can get, and they both happen to not be animals.
But man cannot live on rice alone. Don't get me wrong. My wife is Asian. I eat a lot of rice. So,
people can live a while on rice, but all right. So I think Larry asked an interesting question here, which is if we all transition. By the way, I like this feature. I think I'm going to use this more often. So if a person doesn't want to come on video, or we run out of space, we can always pull up a comment and discuss the comments too. If we all transition, because the animals currently living eventually become substance. So the question is something that's often overlooked as well, right? But I also feel like these kind of questions, while pertinent, they might detract from what veganism would be all about, which is because here's the thing, vegans are not for the absolute ascension of everyone to veganhood necessarily. Most of them, if you actually look up their pages, are about doing this in proportion to what's practically possible, right? So I feel like implicit in the asking of this question is almost the consideration of a boundary condition outside of the scope of that criteria. That criteria.
Yeah, but it does point out how, and also Alan was saying as well. So now we've both got Lacey and Alan saying that if it was just to go bang overnight and then change,
that would be. But they wouldn't say
there'd be a lot of that'd be an impossible thing. So we can't do that. Yeah.
Well, another interesting thing, because I do want to mention something about this particular question. These animals that we're talking about have been genetically engineered basically over time through selective breeding to be food. A lot of them, like,
if we release them into the wild, they'll just be food for something else.
or they'll just die. It's like the chickens,
they'll collapse under their own weight.
Yeah, the broiler chickens that they use for like 90% of fast food restaurants that serve chickens, they become so large so fast that their hearts can't handle it, and so they die after a certain amount of time, just to heart failure. Yeah. Like you can't just release them into the wild and expect them to succeed. They've got like maybe a few months of life.
Although you would make friends with all the cats in the world if you did that.
Right. At the same
time, would they be better off if they didn't exist at all?
Possibly in that regard.
Would it be more merciful for us to just allow them to die in that situation? Like maybe someone could argue that maybe they are better off not existing. If their existence has to be,
I don't think you can say something is better off not existing. That doesn't make sense. Because for something to be anything, it seems it has to first exist, right?
Right. That's true.
There you go. Nice,
off dead. What do you mean?
He's good at that.
I think an important thing to. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm interrupting you, sir. My bad.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mine is lagging, so I can
fix that real quick. We can just there we go. See that?
Oh, okay. I just disappeared. But actually, I would say I have a hypothetical for you guys to consider. So if we had a factory farm that was really efficient at providing meat for marginal humans, let's say hypothetically 70 IQ or below, is put into these factories because they provide more meat for people in the world. In third world countries, for example, maybe it would be a good way to provide meat.
One second. We have to be careful here. 70 IQ or below, did you know? Now, this does not bode well for the IQ test, but the average IQ in African countries is 73. Look it up on the Google map.
Yeah.
I doubt that's actually true. I doubt the statistics.
Look it up.
No, the thing is,
I don't know if that's totally accurate as far as intelligence.
It's accurate as far as IQ tests are accurate, because IQ tests are a bit strange and the things, and like they were made by white people to test out of IQ, and Africans haven't really been living on the same scale. They've been living in a different way.
But I'm not saying that was meant as a point of contention against the veracity of the tests. What I'm saying, okay, and I'm not biased.
Exactly.
I've like scored in the 99th percentile. It's not that I'm saying they're accurate. To the contrary, I'm saying this doesn't look good for the test. It looks like it's very achievement based. If like
it's very skewed,
borderline,
very skewed.
That doesn't seem likely. But let me pull up so you guys know that I'm not just average
Yeah, I actually researched it the other day because someone said it and had to look into it. Whenever someone says something in a debate that I'm actually uncertain of, I actually go and look it up. And if I feel too certain of it, I look it up as well. Basically, I spend a lot of time researching things that people say.
I don't know, how can it be that an entire continent has people, how do they
I don't think it is. I think that the test has a problem. For example, the Flynn effect is one problem with the test. So here we go. This is, I'm going to share this screen.
What, sorry?
All right. Just right here. And
there are also multiple kinds of intelligence that are certainly not tested for on the IQ test.
Our world data,
music, dancing, things like that. But
yeah, I mean, I think that they are not as conclusive as they claim to be. I think there's a lot of parameters that could be overlooked when it comes to these IQ tests. So I think you're onto something there, Wes.
So first of all, what's interesting is that the change in average full-scale IQ by country is not equivalent, right? Which is suspicious. Right? And you can play this, by the way. So let's play this video. Where is this going to?
I don't know that it's doing anything. Oh,
there it is. So basically, you know, the change in average. Whoa, 36 points. What the fuck? 3298. That's data.
Okay.
So you can download. I'm gonna have to sub-analyze this data and look at it by country and the source. But I remember these composition scores do not bode well for people in. So here we go. Change in IQ points. The Flynn effect, right? So let's disease burden. So let's see. I'm looking for. There's a graph. It's a geographical.
So another suspicious factor is that you can improve by retaking the IQ test. The standardized IQ test, your score can actually improve.
That would be that would be a separate discussion for another video that I've got a lot of things that I could discuss with that, but I just want to pull up because I've claimed. All right, so
yeah, we've gone kind of off track, I think. Basically, Yusra's original question was this, like, let's take a demographic of humanity that we can largely agree doesn't contribute much to society and process them into nutrients for the rest of humanity. I'm not sure why we're considering doing that, but
like, is there anything intuitively, at least, seeing a little, what would it be if you had to pick, or would it be wrong at all? Would it be justifiable in any sense? Because I think most people would initially say, well, no, I mean, there could be alternative sources instead of considering marginal humans. Like maybe it's because there's people, or maybe it wouldn't just be linked to the people directly, but the effect that it has on other people, like that care about them. So maybe we'd have to reduce that demographic to like homeless people who have no loved ones or something. I'm not sure, but it's
here it is.
I don't know.
I'm trying to find the direct source of this article, but as we can see, less than 60, right? Greater than 60, greater than 70. If you look by country, it doesn't look good, boys and girls. Right?
We're back to the IQ thing again.
Yeah, see the ranking, and then see it doesn't look good. Let me try to find the actual source. And even so, I'm skeptical of the veracity of the claim, right? But it does not look good. And I've seen this a lot. There are a lot of problems with IQ, and some of them are systemic to the test, not just the data gathering. Because this isn't, my qualm with the test isn't just like data gathering. You know, we've discussed all of those in the dietary conjectures. The conjectures we've had pertaining to diet and nutrition. What I'm talking about are systemic applications. So for example, okay, if I taught Alan an algorithm for fast mental division, and then I used like as a metrized method for assessing his speed at computation, that I happen to use that particular algorithm, and he knew it, he would be a god compared to us suddenly, and he could change literally in a short span of time. I could teach him algorithms. They're called Trachtenberg arithmetic. He was a mathematician at a concentration camp, and so he had to develop methods for fast mental arithmetic without pen and paper. So he developed these methods of operations on digits, and you can get very fast with it. But the point I'm making is what they don't account for in part is, you see, if we were looking at his brain, I suspect that the neurochemistry wouldn't substantially change. There may be subtle discrepancies, but the performance, however, due to the software run on the hardware, if you will, if the analogy holds, not that our brains are comparable to computers directly, so to speak. There may be some relation, but they leak data in ways that computers don't. But what I'm trying to say is that I'm trying to think of how to concretize this. That the test that would not show up. It would not. It would just be his performance, your performance, and
it's a test of performance, not a test of inherent quality.
Right, and so it's not that intelligence isn't necessarily performance, right? It could be.
Any test is going to be a test of performance. That's unavoidable.
I don't know. I don't know about that.
Well, any test that operates in a similar fashion to tests that we currently have, unless you're directly analyzing the chemistry of the brain and you don't even analyze performance at all, in which case that wouldn't be a performance test. But the ways we have to currently do it are performance tests.
Yeah, but that
there's
also
no way around that.
It introduces a problem, though, because what are you measuring that performance against? Like, what decides a good IQ versus a not good IQ? Because it doesn't seem to be a capacity for intelligence.
Yeah, right. Because in other words, it's what tasks you've selected, and if you don't choose them carefully, you're only choosing a subset of possible performances that a person could have, right? And so that's what West means when he says there's multiple types of intelligences. It's really what people I think really mean is there are different tasks that brains could be put to that they can perform differently on.
Yeah.
Right. That is true. However, there are a lot of studies that point to the idea that
there's a general factor.
A lot of these, there's a general factor, and that all of these things are reducible to one underlying variable. And that's the whole idea behind the IQ test. Like, yes, there are different tasks that we can perform, and yes, we will be good at them to varying abilities. But that doesn't mean that there isn't an underlying factor that is directly influencing all the tertiary layers of performance.
Yeah, I don't think people contest that there may be some underlying factors. It's the scope of those factors, right?
And it's the fact that one can, two identical twins with the same intelligence could train differently, and then one would have a higher IQ than the other. But no, sorry, I'm trying to catch up.
I mean, that could happen, but also they understand that there's going to be a variance in results based on individual attempts. That's of course going to happen. That could happen to the same person. You don't even have to do it with twins. You can just have them take the test on 2 separate days, and they'll probably perform a little bit differently.
That's a good.
But there's only a certain percentage that
that'll vary, right? And they get a confidence interval of 95%. I hear the language. I think I'm understanding your question. However, I think the problem with this, is imagine if I told you, for example, that there was, let's change the topic from intelligence to, I don't know, why don't you pick something pertinent and related to molecular biology of macroscopic organisms? So running, right? The speed at which we can run. Yes, there is a general underlying factor of physical components, a velocity, right? A mass, amount of energy. All these things will underlie the mechanism, but the intricacies of how that occurs, right, can be very different. So what I mean by that is look at, say, the phenomenon of flight associated with a plane versus the phenomenon of flight associated with a hummingbird. some of the physical parameters there are required, right? But then where the distinctions exist, which can have fundamental categorical distinctions existent. So, for example, hummingbirds actually can exert enormous, like compared to their size, or even a better example, insectoids, right? So like ants, their exoskeleton is so much stronger, like due to the scale. This is partly due to the scale of gravity, so it's like stronger, right? Than what a person could expect to lift. Like they can support something up to like 50 times their weight. So what I'm trying to tell you is that the general factor isn't sufficient for predicting if and when intelligence is a function of task orientation. There wouldn't be one general factor, is what I'm saying, but many.
So this analogy is interesting, but I'm not sure that it directly applies to the case of human intelligence, because it's more like the difference between the difference between like human thinking and maybe the thinking that one could produce using an AI of some sort. It's not that the underlying machinery is that much different across humanity. We're not thinking really different ways. We're using the same biomechanical structure. Well, because I don't think it's that much. I don't think it's fundamentally different in the way that birds and planes fly differently.
I can tell you it's much more different than computers. And here's how I can illustrate that. Suppose we tried to download information to your brain, right? Like a thought. The problem is that the way our brains seem to work, according to modern neuroscience, is that the associations I made in that thought and understanding it may not even make sense to the way your neurons have connected.
Yep.
Yes.
You can't just download a thought in the same way you can a computer, it seems. It's much more complex. And so it's not true that our brains operate. You're right, there's an underlying mechanism. But there's also, what I'm trying to tell you is not that there isn't potentially a general factor, but that it's probably more likely a multivariate system of differential equations that are complex and that should not be attempted to be reduced to a unidimensional analysis.
Well, but also, if there is an underlying factor when we're talking about the IQ test, is the IQ test effective at grading that underlying factor for intelligence?
That was my initial point, is that it doesn't seem it is, because you can fool it by, as I said, taking Alan and teaching him because there's usually an algorithm for most logically oriented tasks that you can find. And if a person is very good at algorithms and, finding algorithms for particular tasks, they're going to score phenomenally well, including, methods of memory. People who are memory champions, they didn't test remarkably on cognitive psychometric examinations, but they've learned using the method of loci to use the visual storage of their brain, the spatiotemporal parts of their brain. I think it's like I don't know the exact anatomical parts of the brain associated. We need like a neuroscientist for that. But from what I understand, they can memorize, pi to 60,000 digits, but most people can do this. This is a learnable, trainable skill that most people who don't have sufficient cognitive deficiencies can do. And so the problem we have is, it's really back to what we've initially raised. It is, as you said, is the examination good at finding what it's meant to find, and is what we're looking for, is that what intelligence is, right? So those questions are, I think, pertinent to the question, but I feel like we've gotten sidetracked from what we were just.
Yes, we've gotten considerably.
I feel like we're in a whole different direction.
And I mean, and that might be fine. I take it this is the first sort of episode of these podcast things, but we should decide it pretty concretely. Do we want to stay on a general topic of focus, or if the conversation naturally diverges, are we okay with just taking it in that direction?
The thing that I'm thinking about this, and for this episode especially, is that we sort of reached the limit of we reached the limit of where we could really go with Freelee anyways. I mean, we couldn't discuss more without knowing more. So
it would be nice to have her on, though.
Yes, that's where I come from. It'd be nice to know more before saying more. And so like this is something in which is more in our wheelhouse, and we can sort of talk about more, and like it's not stepping on anyone's toes or anything like that. So I'm kind of happy that we did go down this rabbit hole. However, I do have a son who is like in the process of trying to find a lighter so he can set my house on fire, I dare say. I said that I'd be 20 minutes or half an hour or so into him. Doesn't have a great concept of time, but he's got a better concept of time than I do, it seems. A little tyke.
Well, what do you guys say that we conclude the video here, and we'll broadcast next week, and people can comment in the channel, what topics they want to have for the future, and we can probably discuss amongst each other on Facebook, etc., what we want to do next week, and we can conclude this podcast. What do you guys think?
Yep, sounds like a good idea.
Sounds good.
I
think
agree. Okay.
All right, I'm sad to lose the battle against them. Hey, you can stay out of the camera, cheek.
All right, you guys take care.